CEO lived alone for 30 years until a black woman with 2 boys arrived saying, "You're their father." He built a billion-dollar empire. He lived alone for decades, no family, no love, no noise. Then one morning, in the lobby of his glass tower, a black woman shows up with 2 young boys and says their lives are tied to his in a way he never saw coming. At first he thinks it's a lie, until a whispered sentence from one small voice makes his world stop cold. Hidden papers, a dead mother's secret will, a truth buried by power, money, and prejudice. Now he faces an impossible choice: protect everything he owns or accept the family he was never meant to have. Because if he turns them away, he loses more than a company. But if he lets them in, will the truth save him or destroy everything he believes he is? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The gentle hum of automated blinds pulled Jonathan Reed from his dreamless sleep at precisely 5:45 in the morning. He lay still for a moment, staring at the pristine white ceiling of his penthouse bedroom as dawn's first light crept across it. The king-sized bed around him was perfectly made on one side. It had been that way for years now. He never rolled over into that empty space. With practiced precision, he rose and straightened the sheets on his side, smoothing away any evidence that he'd slept there at all. The bedroom, like the rest of his penthouse, was a study in minimalism. All clean lines and muted greys, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city below. Jonathan moved through his morning routine like a well-oiled machine. 15 minutes on the treadmill, 10 minutes of weights, a 7-minute shower, the water temperature exactly 101 degrees. His closet was organized by color, each suit perfectly pressed. He selected a black one today, appropriate for the occasion. As he knotted his tie in front of the bathroom mirror, his eyes avoided meeting their own reflection. Today was his mother's funeral, though the thought stirred nothing inside him. Their relationship had died long before she had, 23 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago, to be precise. The day she'd made it clear that her love came with conditions he couldn't meet. The kitchen was spotless, unused except for his morning coffee. The machine started automatically at 6:30, filling the sterile space with the only warmth it ever knew. He took his cup, black, no sugar, to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below, already alive with morning traffic. From up here, the people looked like ants, scurrying about their insignificant lives. It was better this way, viewing the world from a distance. His phone buzzed exactly once, his assistant's morning brief. He scanned through the day's schedule, mentally calculating the minimum time required at the funeral service before he could return to the office. The notification for the event sat stark and simple on his calendar. Mother's funeral, 10 a.m. The living room, dining room, and study were all similarly immaculate, untouched by human disorder. No photos adorned the walls, no magazines lay scattered on tables. Everything had its place, and nothing moved without purpose. The cleaning service came 3 times a week, though there was rarely anything for them to clean. At 7:15, Jonathan took the private elevator down to his waiting car. Marcus, his driver of 12 years, stood ready by the sleek black vehicle. No words were exchanged. They weren't necessary. The drive to the office would take exactly 22 minutes in morning traffic. He was reviewing quarterly reports on his tablet when his phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sandra, his office assistant. He answered with a tap to his earpiece. "Mr. Reed." Sandra's voice was carefully modulated, as always, but there was an unusual note of tension in it. "I apologize for the early call, but there's a situation in the lobby." Jonathan continued reading the reports. "Handle it." "Sir, there's a woman who's been here since before dawn. Security has asked her to leave several times, but she's refusing." "Then have them remove her," he replied, his tone making it clear the conversation should end there. "She has 2 children with her, sir." Sandra paused. "And she's specifically asking for you. By name." Jonathan's finger stilled on the screen. "I don't know anyone with children." "She's quite insistent, Mr. Reed. She says she won't leave until she speaks with you personally." For the first time that morning, Jonathan's carefully ordered world shifted slightly off its axis. He glanced at his watch. 7:37. The board meeting wasn't until 8:30. And the funeral. "Have security escort them out," he said firmly. "Sir." Sandra hesitated again. "She's been here for hours with those children. They look tired and cold." Jonathan felt a flicker of irritation. Sandra wasn't usually one to push back against his decisions. "Fine, I'll deal with it when I arrive." He ended the call and turned back to his reports, but the words blurred before him. Children. Something uncomfortable stirred in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. Or perhaps didn't want to. The car pulled into the underground parking garage at 7:37. Jonathan gathered his briefcase, straightened his already straight tie, and headed for the private elevator that would take him to his office on the 40th floor. But as the doors opened into the lobby, he found himself hesitating. To his right lay the main lobby, where this woman and her children waited. To his left, the express elevator that would carry him safely away from whatever disruption they represented. For the first time in years, Jonathan Reed's next move wasn't clearly defined in his mental schedule. Security cameras showed a woman in a worn coat sitting on one of the lobby's leather chairs. 2 small children huddled close to her, one sleeping against her shoulder, the other drawing listlessly on a crumpled piece of paper. They looked out of place in the stark corporate environment, a splash of chaos in his carefully ordered world. Jonathan's finger hovered over the elevator button. The sensation of unease grew stronger, creeping up his spine like a cold draft. In 23 years of running this company, no one had ever managed to disturb his routine like this. No one had ever dared to wait for hours, defying security, insisting on seeing him. The lobby's security feed continued to play on the small screen beside the elevator. The woman shifted, adjusting the sleeping child, and for a moment she looked directly at the camera. There was something in her expression, not desperation or anger, but a quiet determination that made Jonathan's carefully maintained composure slip just slightly. He pressed the elevator button, watching the numbers light up as it descended to the lobby level. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Jonathan Reed was about to step off his carefully plotted course, and he had absolutely no idea why. The elevator doors opened to the pristine lobby of Reed Enterprises. Jonathan straightened his shoulders, adopting the commanding presence that had served him well for over 2 decades. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. The usual buzz of activity had stilled, replaced by an unusual tension. Then he saw them. A woman sat in one of the leather chairs near reception, her posture straight despite obvious exhaustion etched across her features. 2 young boys huddled close to her sides, one barely awake and the other clutching a worn backpack. Their clothes were clean but modest, standing out against the lobby's corporate refinement. The woman, she must be in her late 30s, met his gaze directly. There was something unsettling about her calm demeanor, a quiet dignity that seemed to fill the space around her. She showed no hint of nervousness or uncertainty as she stood, gently guiding the boys to their feet. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm Alana Brooks." Jonathan kept his distance, maintaining a cold professionalism. "Mrs. Brooks, I understand you've been causing a disruption in my lobby." "I apologize for any inconvenience," Alana replied, "but this couldn't wait any longer." She placed her hands on the boys' shoulders. "These are your sons, Mr. Reed, Marcus and David." The words hit him like a physical blow. Several staff members nearby stopped pretending not to listen, their heads turning slightly toward the unfolding scene. Jonathan felt heat rise in his neck, but his voice remained arctic. "That's absolutely ridiculous. I suggest you leave before I have security remove you." "No, this is shocking," Alana continued, unruffled by his dismissal. "But these boys deserve to know their father. They deserve the truth." "The truth?" Jonathan's laugh was sharp and brittle. "The truth is that I've never met you before in my life. This is clearly some kind of scheme." His words cut off abruptly as the smaller of the two boys stepped forward. The child couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with warm brown eyes that seemed to pierce right through Jonathan's carefully constructed walls. "Mummy says you're my daddy," he whispered, his small voice carrying in the hushed lobby. Jonathan staggered back a step, his perfectly ordered world tilting on its axis. The boy's eyes, there was something hauntingly familiar about them, something that made his chest constrict painfully. Memories he'd buried decades ago threatened to surface. A summer evening, a chance meeting, a connection he'd been forced to abandon. "This is absurd," he managed, but his voice had lost its authority. He could feel the eyes of his employees, could practically hear the whispers that would spread through the building by lunch. "Security!" 2 guards approached uncertainly, but Alana didn't flinch. "We're not leaving, Mr. Reed. Not until you acknowledge the truth. These boys have waited long enough." The older boy, who looked about 9, pressed closer to his mother, but kept his gaze steady on Jonathan. The resemblance that Jonathan had been desperately trying to deny became impossible to ignore. The set of the jaw, the arch of the eyebrows, even the way the boy held himself. It was like looking at an old photograph of himself. "Get them out of here," Jonathan ordered the guards, his voice rough. "Now, sir." One of the guards started, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Maybe we should—" "Now!" Jonathan barked, already turning away. He couldn't bear to look at them anymore, couldn't handle the way the younger boy's words seemed to echo in his head, couldn't face the quiet strength in Alana's eyes that stirred memories he'd spent years burying. He fled to the private elevator, jabbing the button repeatedly as if that would make it arrive faster. Behind him, he could hear Alana's voice, still calm and resolved. "We'll be here tomorrow, Mr. Reed, and the day after that. Running won't change the truth." The elevator doors finally opened, and Jonathan practically threw himself inside. As they closed, he caught one last glimpse, the younger boy waving hesitantly, the older one standing protective beside his mother. And Alana, her expression not angry or triumphant, but filled with a sadness that seemed to reach across the lobby and wrap around his heart. The elevator began its ascent, but Jonathan barely noticed. His perfectly controlled world was crumbling around him, and all he could hear was that small voice, over and over. "Mommy says you're my daddy." His hands trembled as he braced them against the elevator wall. For the first time in 23 years, Jonathan Reed had no idea what to do next. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the cemetery's perfectly manicured lawns. Jonathan Reed stood rigidly among the gathered mourners, his dark suit a shield against the world. The funeral service for Eleanor Reed had drawn Atlanta's elite, business leaders, social figures, and old money families who'd known his mother for decades. But Jonathan barely heard the minister's words. His thoughts kept drifting back to the scene in his lobby that morning. Those boys' faces, those eyes that seemed to mirror his own. "Eleanor Reed was a pillar of our community," the minister intoned, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Jonathan's mind flickered to a memory. He was 17, bringing home his first serious girlfriend. His mother's face had turned to stone when she saw the girl was black. "Jonathan, darling," Eleanor had said later that night, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You must think of your future. of the family name, of what people will say. He blinked hard, forcing himself back to the present. Around him, Atlanta's finest dabbed at dry eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs. His mother had always cared more about appearances than genuine connections. Another memory surfaced. Love makes you weak, she'd told him countless times. Power is the only thing that lasts. The weight of his phone in his pocket suddenly felt heavy as it vibrated. Jonathan discreetly checked the screen. Charles Morton, his personal attorney. He declined the call, but moments later a text appeared. Urgent. Must speak with you immediately after service. Your mother's will. Time-sensitive matter. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Even in death, his mother was orchestrating events, pulling strings. He typed back a quick confirmation, unease settling in his stomach like lead. The minister's voice droned on about legacy and lasting impact. Jonathan fought back a bitter laugh. His mother's true legacy was the emotional wasteland she'd created in her own son's heart. The way she'd taught him to choose power over love again and again. She made me like her, he thought, and for the first time, it didn't feel like praise. The service continued with practiced precision. Flowers were placed, tears were shed, though Jonathan noticed they seemed performative, much like everything else in his mother's social circle. He remained dry-eyed, standing apart from the crowd. His phone buzzed again. Charles was being insistent. Meet me at the office immediately after burial. Cannot stress urgency enough. Jonathan's response was terse. Understood. As the service drew to a close, something made him scan the cemetery's perimeter. There, beneath a massive oak tree, stood 3 familiar figures. Alana Brooks and her sons, his sons, watched from a respectful distance. They made no move to approach, but their presence sent a jolt through his system. The boys stood close to their mother, but they weren't hiding this time. The older one, Marcus, she'd called him, held his brother's hand. Their posture showed the same quiet dignity their mother possessed. Alana met his gaze across the distance. There was no challenge in her expression, no demand. Instead, he saw something that unsettled him even more. Understanding. As if she knew exactly why she needed to be here today, exactly what his mother's death might mean. Another memory crashed through his defenses, his mother's voice, cold and certain. I've taken care of that little situation. You'll thank me one day, Jonathan. Some people simply aren't meant to be part of our world. He hadn't understood then, but looking at Alana now, pieces were beginning to fall into place. The timing, the sudden disappearance. The way his mother had insisted he focus on his MBA, arranged appropriate dates with appropriate women. The crowd began to disperse, moving toward their luxury cars with subdued murmurs about the reception. Jonathan stood frozen, watching as Alana gathered her boys and turned to leave. They didn't look back, but their presence had left an indelible mark on the day. His phone buzzed one final time. Charles again. En route to office now. This changes everything. Jonathan straightened his tie, a gesture of control when everything felt like it was slipping away. He walked to his waiting car, each step feeling heavier than the last. Behind him, his mother's fresh grave seemed to mock his perfectly ordered world, a world that was beginning to crack at its carefully constructed seams. The chauffeur held the door, and Jonathan slid into the leather interior. As the car pulled away, he caught one last glimpse of Alana and the boys walking through the cemetery gates. The sight burned itself into his mind. 3 figures moving with purpose and grace, carrying a truth that threatened to shatter everything he thought he knew about his life, his mother, and himself. To the office, he told his driver, his voice steadier than he felt. But inside, questions tumbled like autumn leaves in a storm. What had his mother done? What was in that will? And how had Alana known, exactly known, to be here today. The car merged into Atlanta traffic, carrying him toward answers he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The evening sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Charles Morton's law office. Jonathan sat rigidly in one of the leather chairs, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the armrest. The past few hours felt surreal. The funeral, those 3 figures standing beneath the oak tree, and now this urgent meeting. Charles shuffled through papers with methodical precision, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. The sound of rustling documents filled the otherwise silent room. Jonathan checked his watch. 6:15 in the evening. "I appreciate you coming directly from the service," Charles said, finally looking up. "Your mother was very specific about the timing of this meeting." "Let's get this over with," Jonathan replied, his voice clipped. "I have a board meeting tomorrow morning." Charles nodded, but something in his expression made Jonathan's stomach tighten. The lawyer reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "Before we proceed with the standard provisions, there's a special clause that takes immediate effect upon your mother's death." Jonathan frowned. "A special clause?" "Yes." Charles carefully broke the seal, his movements deliberately slow. "This was written and notarized 15 years ago, with explicit instructions that it remain sealed until today." The tension in Jonathan's shoulders increased. 15 years. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Charles cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Eleanor Reed, being of sound mind, hereby establish the following condition regarding the controlling interest of Reed Enterprises currently held by my son, Jonathan Alexander Reed." Jonathan leaned forward, his heart beginning to pound. To maintain his position as majority shareholder and CEO of Reed Enterprises, Jonathan must accept full legal guardianship of Marcus James Brooks, born April 15, 2008, and Thomas William Brooks, born September 3, 2009. The words hit Jonathan like physical blows. His mouth went dry. "What did you say?" Charles continued reading, his voice steady and professional. "Should Jonathan refuse to acknowledge and accept guardianship of these children, his controlling interest in Reed Enterprises will be immediately transferred to the board of directors, to be distributed as they see fit." "This is impossible," Jonathan exploded, surging to his feet. "This can't be legal." "I assure you it's completely legal," Charles said, removing his glasses. "Your mother was very thorough. The documentation includes birth certificates, medical records, and DNA test results, all obtained without your knowledge." Jonathan paced the office, his carefully maintained control crumbling. "She knew," he whispered, then louder. "She knew about them all along." "Yes," Charles confirmed. "The paperwork indicates she launched a private investigation shortly after Ms. Brooks disappeared. She tracked everything, the pregnancies, the births, the boy's development. And she never said a word," Jonathan said, his voice raw. "Instead, she waited until she was dead to spring this trap." "Your mother was—" Charles paused, choosing his words carefully. "A complicated woman, but she was also extremely strategic. This clause ensures you'll have no choice but to acknowledge these children." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, disheveling his usually perfect appearance. "Why now? Why not 15 years ago when she first found out?" "The timing is explicitly connected to her death," Charles explained. "I believe she wanted to maintain control while she was alive, but also ensure these boys would be provided for after she was gone." "Provided for?" Jonathan laughed bitterly. "She drove their mother away. She made sure they grew up without a father." "Yes," Charles said quietly. "And now she's forcing you to correct that situation. On her terms, of course." Jonathan collapsed back into the chair, his mind racing. The company was his life's work. He'd spent 20 years building it from a regional business into a global corporation. The thought of losing control was unthinkable. How long do I have to decide? Charles consulted the document. 72 hours from the time of this reading. If you haven't initiated guardianship proceedings by then, the transfer of shares will begin automatically. Jonathan stared at the paper Charles had placed before him. There they were. The boys' names in black and white, their birth dates, their mother's name. Alana's name. The truth he'd tried to deny in the lobby that morning stared back at him, undeniable and unchangeable. Marcus James Brooks, Thomas William Brooks, his sons. The setting sun painted the office in shades of orange and red as Jonathan sat motionless, studying those names. His mother's final power play had backed him into a corner, forcing him to face the very thing he'd run from that morning. The very thing Alana had tried to tell him. Each letter of their names seemed to burn into his consciousness. Marcus, Thomas, Brooks, soon to be Reed, if he wanted to keep everything he'd worked for. His mother had ensured he couldn't hide behind denial any longer. She'd made sure the cost of continued denial would be too high to bear. The papers blurred as he stared at them, his mother's manipulation reaching out from beyond the grave to reshape his carefully ordered world. The boys were real. They were his. And now, thanks to his mother's final chess move, they were unavoidable. The cafe was nearly empty at 9 o'clock in the evening. Soft jazz played in the background as Jonathan sat across from Alana, 2 untouched cups of coffee between them. The overhead lights cast gentle shadows across their faces, highlighting the weariness in both their expressions. "Thank you for meeting me," Jonathan said stiffly, his fingers drumming against the ceramic mug. Alana nodded, her hands wrapped around her own cup for warmth. "The boys are with my sister. I thought we needed to talk without distractions." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Yes, about that. My lawyer tells me you've known about my mother's will for some time." 3 days, Alana corrected quietly. "A letter arrived after her death. That's why we came to find you." "And before that?" Jonathan's voice held an edge. 15 years of silence? Alana took a slow breath, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Jonathan's barely contained anger. "I think you need to hear the whole story. From the beginning." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Do you remember that summer? 2007? Jonathan's fingers stopped there, drumming. Of course he remembered. He'd been 32, newly promoted to CEO after his father's retirement. She'd been 28, brilliant and beautiful, working in corporate communications. "We kept it quiet," Alana continued. "Office relationships weren't exactly encouraged. But for 6 months," her voice softened. "For 6 months it was real, Jonathan. Until you disappeared," he said flatly. No explanation, no goodbye, just an empty desk and a resignation letter. Pain flickered across Alana's face. "Your mother called me to her office one afternoon. She had photos of us having dinner, walking in the park, leaving my apartment. She said I was a distraction, a liability, that I would ruin your future." Jonathan's stomach clenched. "She threatened you." "Not directly. She was too smart for that." Alana's fingers tightened around her cup. "She talked about the board's conservative values, about shareholders who might not appreciate their CEO dating a black woman, about how quickly rumors could destroy careers." "You could have told me," Jonathan said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "Could I?" Alana met his gaze steadily. "You were so focused on proving yourself. The company was everything to you. And Eleanor, she made it clear that if I stayed, she would make sure you had to choose between me and Reed Enterprises." Jonathan closed his eyes, remembering his mother's subtle manipulations, her way of ensuring he remained focused on what she considered important. "So you left." "I left," Alana agreed softly. "And 2 weeks later I found out I was pregnant." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "She knew," Jonathan said finally. "The whole time, she knew." "Yes, she had me followed. When I started showing, her lawyer appeared with papers. A trust fund for the baby. A non-disclosure agreement. Hush money." Alana's voice held no bitterness, just stated facts. "I refused to sign. But you never told me either," Jonathan pointed out. "I watched you from afar." Alana admitted. "Your success, your achievements, every interview where you talked about dedication, about sacrifice, about putting the company first. I couldn't risk our children becoming a corporate scandal, or worse, being rejected by their father." Jonathan flinched at the word children. "The second pregnancy. Thomas was a surprise. By then I'd built a life for us. A good life. Marcus was 3, happy, healthy. I thought about reaching out, but—" She shook her head. "Your mother's warnings still echoed, and you seemed content with your life." "Content," Jonathan repeated, the word tasting bitter. "I lived in silence, in emptiness, while my sons—" His voice cracked slightly. "They know about you," Alana said gently. "Not everything, but enough. I never lied to them. I told them their father was a good man who didn't know about them, that sometimes grown-ups make complicated choices." Jonathan pushed his coffee aside, untouched. "And now my mother's final manipulation forces everything into the open." "I'm sorry," Alana said sincerely. "I never wanted it to happen like this. The letter arrived, explaining about the will, about the guardianship clause. I had to make a choice. Keep protecting them from possible rejection, or give them a chance to know their father." Jonathan studied her face in the dim light. The years had been kind to her. There were a few subtle lines around her eyes, but she still carried herself with the same quiet dignity he remembered. The same strength that had first drawn him to her. "My lawyer says I have 72 hours to initiate guardianship proceedings," he said finally. "If I don't, I lose control of the company." "I know." Alana's voice was soft. "What do you want to do?" Jonathan checked his watch. 11:45 p.m. "The hearing is tomorrow morning at 9. We need a temporary arrangement, just until everything's sorted legally." He took a deep breath. "My estate has a guest house, 3 bedrooms, private entrance. You and the boys could stay there, maintain your independence, but be close enough to satisfy the legal requirements." Alana studied him for a long moment. "Just to protect the company?" "For now," Jonathan agreed, unable to meet her eyes. "Until we figure out everything else." Alana nodded slowly. "All right, I'll get the boys and our overnight bags from my sisters. We can be there in an hour." As they stood to leave, Jonathan suddenly remembered something. "Their names," he said. "Marcus James and Thomas William. You gave them family names." "Yes," Alana confirmed quietly. "Your grandfather and your father. I wanted them to have that connection, even if they couldn't have anything else." The simple statement hit Jonathan harder than any accusation could have. As they walked out into the cool night air, he realized that while he'd spent 15 years building walls of silence around himself, Alana had been building bridges he never knew existed. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jonathan's penthouse, casting long shadows across the pristine marble floors. At precisely 7 o'clock, the elevator chimed. Jonathan stood from his precisely arranged breakfast, his shoulders tense as he walked to meet his unexpected guests. The doors opened to reveal Alana, looking composed despite the early hour, and two small boys who clung to either side of her. Marcus, the older one at 12, had Jonathan's height and bearing, while 8-year-old Thomas shared his mother's softer features. Both children wore neatly pressed clothes and carried small overnight bags, their eyes wide as they took in the vast space. "Good morning," Alana said quietly, ushering the boys forward. "Say hello to Mr. Reed." Thomas half hid behind his mother, but Marcus stepped forward, chin lifted in a way that made Jonathan's chest tighten. "Good morning, sir," he said clearly. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Welcome. The guest quarters are this way." He turned, expecting them to follow, and tried to see his home through their eyes. The stark modernist furniture, the monochrome artwork, the absolute absence of anything that might suggest children had ever existed in this space. "It's like a museum," Thomas whispered loudly to his mother, his voice echoing slightly in the marble hallway. "Inside voice, honey," Alana reminded gently, though her lips twitched with amusement. Jonathan led them through the main living area toward the east wing. "The guest residence has its own entrance and kitchen facilities," he explained, his voice formal. "You'll have complete privacy. Is that a real piano?" Marcus interrupted, stopping by the grand piano that served as a sculptural element in the living room. His fingers twitched at his sides, but he didn't touch it. "Yes," Jonathan answered shortly, then saw Alana's gentle head shake. He forced himself to add, "Do you play?" "Mom's teaching us," Thomas piped up, seemingly forgetting his shyness. "But we only have a keyboard at home." Jonathan's chest tightened again. "Perhaps later," he managed, continuing toward the guest wing. The guest quarters were spacious but warmer than the main house, with comfortable furnishings and large windows overlooking the city. Alana did a quick tour with the boys, helping them choose rooms. Marcus claiming the blue room, Thomas the one with the window seat. "Breakfast is ready in the main kitchen," Jonathan announced stiffly, "if you'd like to join me." The kitchen, like everything else in Jonathan's home, was a study in efficiency and minimalism. The boys sat carefully at the sleek breakfast bar, their feet dangling from the high stools. Alana moved with quiet confidence, helping them with portions from the spread Jonathan's housekeeper had prepared. "Do you always eat alone?" Thomas asked suddenly, looking around the empty space. "Thomas," Alana said softly, but Jonathan held up a hand. "Yes," he answered honestly. "I usually do." "That's sad," Thomas declared, then immediately stuffed a huge bite of pancake in his mouth. Marcus shot his brother a look. "Do you work from home?" he asked, clearly trying to be mature. "Sometimes," Jonathan replied, watching as Thomas created elaborate patterns in his syrup. "I have an office downstairs. Mom works from home sometimes too," Marcus continued. "She's a graphic designer. She makes things look beautiful." Jonathan glanced at Alana, surprised. She shrugged slightly. "It allows for flexible hours." The conversation lapsed into silence, broken only by the clink of silverware and Thomas's occasional humming. Jonathan found himself studying their faces, looking for traces of himself, of his father, of the family he'd never known he had. "The hearing is at 9, he said finally, addressing Alana. "My lawyer will meet us there." Alana nodded. "My sister will come stay with the boys?" "We can't come," Marcus asked, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "Not this time, sweetheart," Alana said gently. "This is just for the grown-ups." The morning passed in a blur of small moments that kept catching Jonathan off guard. Thomas's delighted discovery of the building's indoor pool visible from their windows, Marcus's careful inspection of the bookshelves in the study, the sound of their footsteps echoing in hallways that had known only his solitary tread for so long. At 8:30, Alana's sister arrived, a younger version of Alana with a warmer smile and louder voice. She immediately put everyone at ease, producing board games from her bag and settling the boys in the guest living room. The courthouse was a 20-minute drive away. Jonathan and Alana sat in uncomfortable silence in the back of his town car, each looking out their respective windows. "They're good boys," Jonathan said suddenly, surprising himself. "Yes," Alana agreed softly. "They are." The hearing itself was mercifully brief. Jonathan's lawyer presented the will's requirements, Alana confirmed her agreement to the arrangement, and temporary custody was granted pending a full hearing in 30 days. Throughout it all, Jonathan kept remembering Thomas's face at breakfast, the simple observation that eating alone was sad. They returned to the penthouse in the early afternoon to find the boys and their aunt engaged in what appeared to be an epic Monopoly battle. The sound of their laughter carried down the hallway, bouncing off the marble and glass, filling spaces that had never known such sounds. "Ha! Park Place!" Thomas crowed triumphantly. "Pay up, Aunt Jenny!" "You're breaking me, kid." Jenny laughed, counting out colorful bills. Marcus looked up as Jonathan and Alana entered. "How did it go?" "Everything's fine," Alana assured him. "We can stay here for now, just like we discussed." Jenny packed up shortly after, hugging the boys tightly and whispering something to Alana that made her smile. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Jonathan found himself alone with his newfound family, the afternoon stretching ahead like uncharted territory. "Can we see the pool?" Thomas asked hopefully. "Tomorrow," Alana promised. "We need to unpack first." The boys disappeared down the hallway to their rooms, their footsteps echoing, their voices carrying clearly as they discussed who would get which drawer in their shared bathroom. Jonathan stood in his living room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of life filling his carefully constructed silence. "Mom!" Thomas's voice rang out. "Marcus says I can't put my space posters up." "Can too!" Marcus called back. "Mom said we could decorate." Their laughter echoed again, bright and clear, like bells chiming in an empty church. Jonathan closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, and for the first time in decades, the silence in his home felt less like peace and more like absence. The sound of small feet running down the hallway made him open his eyes. Thomas skidded to a stop in front of him, holding a poster of the solar system. "Mr. Reed," he said breathlessly, "do you like space?" Before Jonathan could answer, Marcus appeared behind his brother. "Of course he does, dummy. Look at all the astronomy books in his study." And just like that, the carefully maintained quiet of Jonathan Reed's ordered world shattered completely, replaced by the chaotic, vibrant sound of children's voices echoing through halls that had waited far too long to hear them. As evening approached, Jonathan retreated to his home office, a familiar sanctuary of leather and mahogany. Through the open door, he could hear the boys settling in at the dining room table with their schoolwork. The sound of pencils scratching paper and quiet murmurs drifted in, so different from his usual solitude. "Mom, I don't understand this math problem." Marcus's voice carried clearly. "Let me see," Alana replied. There was a pause. "This is advanced algebra. I think we might need some help with this one." Jonathan tensed, knowing what was coming. Sure enough, soft footsteps approached his office door. He looked up to find Alana standing there, her expression carefully neutral. "I hate to interrupt," she said, "but Marcus is working on algebra, and it's a bit beyond my expertise. Would you mind—" Jonathan hesitated, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. He could easily claim to be too busy, maintain the safe distance he'd cultivated. But something in Marcus's frustrated sigh from the other room made him push back from his desk. "I suppose I could take a look," he said stiffly. At the dining room table, Marcus hunched over his textbook, eraser shavings scattered around him. Thomas sat across from him, tongue poking out as he concentrated on his own homework. Jonathan approached cautiously, as if the domestic scene might shatter if he moved too quickly. "Which problem?" he asked, standing behind Marcus's chair. Marcus pointed to an equation. "I keep getting it wrong. The answer in the back of the book is different." Jonathan leaned closer, scanning the problem. "Ah, I see where you're getting stuck. You need to isolate the variable first." For the next 15 minutes, Jonathan found himself explaining the steps, watching Marcus's face light up with understanding. "So that's why you moved the 3 to the other side?" "Exactly." Jonathan straightened up, oddly satisfied. "Try the next one on your own." "Can you help me with science after?" Thomas asked hopefully, holding up his worksheet about the solar system. Before Jonathan could formulate an excuse, he found himself pulled into another explanation, this time about planetary orbits. The minutes stretched into an hour as he moved between the boys, checking work, clarifying concepts. It was not unpleasant. At 8:30, Alana announced bedtime. The boys protested automatically but began gathering their books. "Can Mr. read us a story?" Thomas asked suddenly. Jonathan froze. Alana intervened smoothly. "I'm sure Mr. Reed is very busy." "No, it's fine," Jonathan heard himself say. "One story." The boys' room had already been transformed from its former sterile guest state. Space posters covered one wall, while sports pennants decorated another. 2 twin beds stood against opposite walls, with a shared nightstand between them. Thomas darted to a small bookshelf and returned with a well-worn picture book. "This one's our favorite." Jonathan accepted the book awkwardly, perching on the edge of Thomas's bed. The boys scrambled under their covers as Alana stood in the doorway, watching with an expression Jonathan couldn't quite read. "The Little Engine That Could." Jonathan read stiffly. By Watty Piper. As he began reading, his corporate presentation voice gradually softened, falling into the rhythm of the familiar story. The boys chimed in on the "I think I can" parts, their voices growing sleepier with each repetition. By the last page, Thomas's eyes were closed, his breathing even. Marcus fought to keep his eyes open, but they drifted shut as Jonathan closed the book. Alana stepped forward silently, adjusting blankets and pressing gentle kisses to foreheads. Jonathan stood, uncertain what to do with his hands, with himself in this intimate moment. "Good night, Mr. Reed," Marcus mumbled. "Good night," Jonathan replied softly, following Alana out of the room. In the hallway, she paused. "Thank you for helping with homework and the story. It meant a lot to them." Jonathan nodded stiffly, retreating to his room without response. Later, lying in his king-sized bed, Jonathan stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of his transformed home. A toilet flushed down the hall, soft footsteps passed his door, Alana checking on the boys one last time, the gentle click of a door closing. The silence that followed was different from his usual solitude. It was alive somehow, filled with the presence of sleeping breaths and shifting bodies. For the first time in decades, the vast emptiness of his penthouse felt inhabited. The thought should have disturbed him, this invasion of his carefully ordered world. Instead, he found himself listening to the small sounds of shared life, wondering how he'd never noticed how hollow the silence had been before. Sleep eluded him. At 4:30 in the morning, he gave up trying. Usually, he would head straight to his home gym, but today his feet carried him to the kitchen instead. He stood there for a long moment, considering the gleaming appliances he rarely used beyond coffee and protein shakes. With deliberate movements, he opened the refrigerator, examining its contents. Eggs, milk, bread, basic supplies Alana had brought yesterday. On a shelf, he spotted bacon, something he hadn't allowed himself in years. The sound of a pan hitting the stovetop seemed impossibly loud in the pre-dawn quiet. Jonathan cracked eggs carefully, arranged bacon strips with precision. Toast went into the toaster. Coffee began to brew. Simple actions, yet they felt monumental, like crossing some invisible line. As dawn's first light began filtering through the windows, the kitchen filled with the warm scent of breakfast. Real breakfast, not protein shakes and meal replacement bars. Jonathan stood at the stove, spatula in hand, realizing he couldn't remember the last time he'd cooked for anyone, including himself. Through the large windows, the sky slowly brightened, painting the kitchen in soft morning light. The bacon sizzled, coffee dripped, and somewhere down the hall, the first stirrings of waking children began to break the morning silence. Jonathan adjusted his tie for the third time as they walked through the school's main entrance. The polished hallways of Brighton Academy echoed with their footsteps, his measured stride, Alana's confident pace, and the boys' excited scuffling. "Remember," Alana murmured, "this is just a standard enrollment meeting." Jonathan nodded stiffly. Standard or not, he felt distinctly out of place. Boardrooms he could handle. Elementary schools were foreign territory. Principal Davidson's office screamed old money with its dark wood paneling and leather chairs. The woman herself sat behind an imposing desk, her pearl necklace gleaming as she assessed them over half-moon glasses. "Mr. Reed," she smiled tightly, "what an unexpected pleasure, though I must say this is highly irregular. The circumstances are unique," Jonathan acknowledged, settling into a chair. The boys sat between him and Alana, fidgeting in their Sunday best. "Indeed." Principal Davidson's gaze slid to Alana, then back to Jonathan. "Brighton Academy has certain standards to maintain. Our admissions process is quite selective." "The boys' academic records are excellent," Alana interjected smoothly, producing a folder. "Both are reading above grade level, and Thomas shows particular aptitude for mathematics." The principal accepted the folder with 2 fingers, as if it might bite. "Yes, well, there are other considerations. Culture fit, for instance. Family background." Her tone dripped with implications. Jonathan felt something tighten in his chest. He recognized that tone, had heard it in countless boardrooms, country clubs, his own mother's voice. The polite veneer over ugly prejudice. "Their background," he said carefully, "includes a Harvard-educated mother and a father who runs one of the largest technology companies in the country." Of course. Principal Davidson's smile didn't reach her eyes. "However, our current semester is full, perhaps next year." "There are 3 openings in their respective grades," Alana cut in quietly. "I checked the website this morning." The principal's smile thinned. "Those spots are tentatively reserved. For more suitable candidates?" Jonathan's voice was ice cold. The words had left his mouth before he could stop them, surprising even himself. Marcus looked up at him, brown eyes wide. Thomas grabbed his brother's hand under the chair, both boys tensing as if preparing for a familiar battle. Something in Jonathan snapped. "Let me be clear," he said, leaning forward. "My sons will be enrolled in this school today. They will receive the same opportunities, respect, and consideration as every other student. If that presents a problem, I'm happy to discuss it with the Board of Trustees, several of whom sit on my company's board as well." The principal's face went pale. "Mr. Reed, I didn't mean to imply—" "Yes, you did." Alana's voice was gentle but firm. "And we both know exactly what you meant to imply." Jonathan stood, straightening his jacket. "We'll need those enrollment forms now, Principal Davidson. Unless you'd prefer I make some calls." Within an hour, the boys were officially enrolled. As they left the office, Thomas slipped his small hand into Jonathan's. The gesture caught him off guard. this simple expression of trust he hadn't earned. That evening, after the boys were settled with homework, Alana found Jonathan in his home office. She carried 2 cups of tea, setting one beside him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for standing up for them today." Jonathan stared into the steaming cup. "I should have done it sooner, 15 years sooner." "You're doing it now." Alana settled into a chair, her presence somehow both gentle and immovable. "That matters." Silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable. Finally, Jonathan spoke. "How did you do it? Raise them alone, face that kind of resistance every day?" "Faith," she answered simply. "In God, in myself, in the truth that my boys deserve dignity regardless of what anyone else thinks." Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. "I've never been much for religion." "I know." Alana's smile held no judgment. "Faith isn't about religion, Jonathan. It's about believing in something bigger than ourselves, something that gives us strength when we're tired of fighting, hope when the world seems determined to deny it." She paused, sipping her tea. "When your mother threatened to destroy my career if I told you about the pregnancy, I could have given in to bitterness. Instead, I chose to believe that truth and love would prevail in God's time. I taught our sons the same, not to hate, but to hope, to pray for those who hurt them, even while standing firm in their own worth." Jonathan thought about the principal's office, about Thomas's small hand seeking his. "They're remarkable boys." "They are," Alana agreed. "And they're yours too, Jonathan. Not just legally now, but in all the ways that matter, if you let them be." Later that night, passing the boys' room, Jonathan heard soft voices. He paused, listening despite himself. "Dear God," Marcus was saying, "thank you for Mommy and for Thomas being smart at math, 'cause I'm not. Please help me not be scared at the new school. And please help Mr. Reed." Thomas added, "He seems sad sometimes. Maybe you could help him be happy, like you helped Mommy be happy even when things were hard? And maybe help him want to be our dad for real?" "Amen." They finished together. Jonathan stood frozen in the hallway, something raw and painful unfurling in his chest. Their simple words, their innocent faith in God, in possibility, in Him, pierced through decades of careful emotional distance. He walked to his room, their prayer echoing in his mind. For the first time in years, he felt tears burning behind his eyes. Jonathan sat in his downtown office, surrounded by stacks of files and archived documents. His mother's meticulous record-keeping, once a source of pride, now revealed darker purposes. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk as his lawyer, David Chen, carefully sorted through another box of correspondence. "Here," David said, sliding a yellowed folder across the polished mahogany desk. "Internal memos from 15 years ago. You'll want to see these." Jonathan's hands trembled slightly as he opened the file. Inside, a series of emails painted an ugly picture. His mother's words, cold and calculated, outlined her plan to remove Alana from Jonathan's life. "I will not have my son's legacy tainted," one memo read. "The board would never accept this arrangement. Measures must be taken." Another email to HR detailed concerns about Alana's performance, all fabricated, all dated after his mother discovered their relationship. The systematic dismantling of a promising career, orchestrated with surgical precision. "She buried this deep," David commented, adjusting his glasses. "But your mother kept everything. Maybe she wanted you to find it someday." Jonathan's jaw clenched. Or she was just protecting herself, making sure she had leverage if anyone questioned her actions. He picked up another document, this one a private investigator's report. It contained photos of a pregnant Alana, hospital records, birth certificates. His mother had known everything. tracked every detail of his sons' lives while keeping them hidden from him. The DNA results came in. David said quietly, pulling out a sealed envelope. Though, looking at those boys, I doubt we needed the confirmation. Jonathan stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. The clinical language blurred before his eyes, but the conclusion was clear: 99.9% probability of paternity for both Marcus and Thomas. Draft a company statement, he said, his voice rough. I want it released by noon. David nodded, pulling out his laptop. How do you want to handle this? Jonathan stood, walking to the window. The city sprawled below, unchanged by the seismic shifts in his personal life. The truth, simply and directly. I have 2 sons. They will be acknowledged publicly as my heirs. Any questions about their mother or the timing will be met with a clear statement about my deep respect for Alana Brooks and my commitment to my children. The board won't like the surprise. The board will adapt. Jonathan turned, his expression hardened by resolve. Or they can find another CEO. It took 2 hours to craft the statement. Jonathan read each word carefully, ensuring nothing could be misconstrued or twisted against his family. When it finally went live on the company website, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. That evening, Alana suggested they attend a service at her church. Jonathan's initial instinct was to refuse, but the hopeful looks on his sons' faces made him reconsider. The church was smaller than he expected, warm and welcoming rather than imposing. Wooden pews gleamed softly in the evening light, filtering through stained glass windows. The congregation was diverse, families of all backgrounds gathering in easy fellowship. Marcus tugged at Jonathan's sleeve as they found seats. We sit in the middle, he whispered importantly, so we can see everything. Thomas nodded solemnly, and hear the music better. Jonathan found himself sandwiched between his sons, Alana on Thomas's other side. The familiar scent of her perfume brought back memories he'd long suppressed. Quiet evenings, shared dreams, a future that should have been. The service began with music, and Jonathan watched in amazement as his usually fidgety sons sang along, their young voices lifted in genuine joy. The pastor's message was simple but profound, speaking of grace and second chances, of healing old wounds and finding new paths. Sometimes, the pastor said, his gentle voice carrying to every corner, God's timeline isn't our timeline, but his plans unfold in perfect season if we have the courage to embrace them. Jonathan felt Thomas lean against him, small head resting trustingly on his arm. On his other side, Marcus had pulled out a small notebook and was carefully copying down Bible verses, his tongue sticking out in concentration. The peace he'd been chasing through decades of achievement and acquisition settled over him like a warm blanket. Here, in this unexpected moment, with his sons beside him and their mother's quiet strength nearby, Jonathan found something he hadn't even known he was missing. When the final hymn began, Thomas held up his hymnal, sharing it with Jonathan. The boy's finger traced each line, helping his father follow along. Marcus joined in, his clear voice carrying the melody while Thomas tried for harmony. Jonathan didn't sing, he didn't know the words, and music had never been his strength. But he held the hymnal, stood between his sons, and felt the vibrations of their voices in his chest. It was enough, more than enough. After the service, several church members approached to welcome them. There was no judgment in their greetings, no sideways glances or whispered comments, just genuine warmth and inclusion. Your boys are a blessing, an elderly woman told Jonathan, patting his arm. We've watched them grow into such fine young men. You must be very proud. I am, Jonathan replied, surprising himself with how true the words felt. I'm learning to be the father they deserve. Later, as they walked to the car under a sky full of stars, Marcus slipped his hand into Jonathan's. "Did you like it, Dad? The church, I mean." The word Dad still caught him off guard, but in a good way. "I did," he answered honestly. "It was peaceful. That's what Mom always says." Thomas chimed in from his other side. "That church is where you can find peace when things get hard." Jonathan caught Alana's eye over the boys' heads. She smiled, a gentle expression that spoke of forgiveness and possibility. The drive home was quiet, both boys drowsy in the back seat. Jonathan found himself driving more carefully than usual, precious cargo now entrusted to his care. At home, he helped carry a sleeping Marcus to bed, while Alana guided a stumbling Thomas. They worked together seamlessly, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of days. Later, alone in his study, Jonathan pulled out his mother's files again. The evidence of her prejudice and manipulation still hurt, but the sting was lessened now. She had tried to prevent what she saw as a scandal, but had instead created a legacy of love and redemption that would far outlast her carefully constructed social barriers. He closed the files, knowing he would never need to open them again. The truth was acknowledged. His sons were publicly claimed, and the future stretched out before them, uncertain but full of promise. In the quiet of the evening, Jonathan could hear his sons' soft breathing from their rooms down the hall. The silence that had once defined his life was gone, replaced by the gentle rhythms of family. And in that change, he found a peace he never knew he needed. Jonathan Reed's Monday morning began with a series of urgent messages from his executive team. His phone buzzed repeatedly as he stood in his kitchen, coffee growing cold in his hand. The boys were still asleep, and Alana was making breakfast, humming softly as she moved around the kitchen. The first email made his stomach clench. Someone had leaked details of the guardianship hearing to the press. Not just leaked, twisted them. The attached article painted Alana as a calculating opportunist who had orchestrated a long-term plan to gain control of Reed Enterprises through her children. "Jonathan." Alana's voice broke through his concentration. "Is everything all right?" He couldn't meet her eyes. "I need to get to the office. Now." The elevator ride down felt endless. His phone continued its relentless assault of notifications. By the time he reached the lobby, 3 major business news outlets had picked up the story. The headlines made him sick. Reed Enterprise heir trapped in custody battle. Mystery woman claims billions through secret children. Reed family legacy under attack. His driver was waiting, face carefully neutral. "Straight to the office, sir?" Jonathan nodded, already dialing his legal team. The morning traffic crawled by as he listened to his chief counsel outline the mounting crisis. "The board is calling an emergency meeting," his lawyer explained. "They're citing the company's morality clause. There's talk of a vote of no confidence." The gleaming Reed Enterprises tower loomed ahead. Jonathan straightened his tie, steeling himself. The lobby fell silent as he strode through, whispers following in his wake. His executive assistant met him at the elevator, tablet in hand. "The board is assembled in the main conference room," she said quietly. "And, sir, they've brought outside counsel." The conference room doors opened to reveal 12 stern faces. These were people he'd worked with for years, some for decades. Today they looked at him like strangers. "Jonathan." Gerald Matthews, the senior board member, spoke first. "We've called this meeting to address the serious allegations that have come to light." "Allegations?" Jonathan's voice was ice. "You mean my children?" "We mean the situation that threatens the stability of this company." Another board member cut in. "The timing is suspicious, Jonathan. Right after your mother's death? With that convenient will clause?" For 3 hours they hammered him. Questions about Alana's background, insinuations about her motives, concerns about company image. Each comment felt like a personal betrayal. We've prepared a statement, Gerald finally said, sliding a document across the table. Distancing the company from these claims until they can be properly investigated. Jonathan scanned the paper, his anger building. The statement effectively called Alana a liar and suggested the children's paternity was in question, despite the DNA results. "This is unacceptable," he said flatly. "It's necessary," Gerald countered. "The stock is already down 8 points. Major investors are nervous. We have a responsibility to protect this company. By destroying an innocent woman's reputation. By protecting what your family built." Gerald's voice softened. "Jonathan, think carefully. Everything you've worked for is at risk. Your mother would have understood the need for discretion." The mention of his mother hit hard. Wasn't this exactly what she had done 15 years ago? Used power and influence to erase a problem? The day dragged on in a blur of meetings and phone calls. Legal threats mounted. Major shareholders demanded explanations. By late afternoon, Jonathan felt himself retreating behind familiar walls of corporate detachment. When he finally returned home that evening, the penthouse was quiet. The boys were doing homework at the kitchen table, Alana helping them with math problems. They looked up when he entered, hope in their eyes. "Dad!" Marcus started to get up, but something in Jonathan's expression made him pause. Jonathan walked past them to his study, closing the door. He stood at the window, watching the city lights blur through unshed tears. Everything he'd built was crumbling. His carefully controlled world was spinning apart. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Alana entered, closing the door behind her. "The boys are asking for you," she said simply. "I can't." He started, then stopped. "This isn't working." "What isn't working, Jonathan?" "Any of it." He turned to face her. "The board is threatening legal action. The press is having a field day. My investors are panicking." "And that matters more than your sons? You don't understand. Everything I've built—" "I understand perfectly." Alana interrupted, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "You're choosing your mother's path. Control over connection. Power over love. That's not fair. Neither is what you're doing to those boys." She moved closer, but didn't touch him. "They've waited their whole lives for you, Jonathan. And now you're going to disappoint them because some boardroom bullies threatened your position?" Jonathan's voice turned cold. "Perhaps this arrangement needs to be reconsidered." Neither of them had noticed the study door opening slightly, but now a small gasp made them both turn. Thomas stood there, Marcus right behind him, their young faces stricken. "You don't want us anymore?" Thomas whispered. Before Jonathan could respond, Alana moved swiftly to the boys. "Come on, sweethearts. Let's go pack our things." "Mom?" Marcus's voice broke on the word. "It's okay, baby. We've done this before. We'll be okay." Jonathan watched, frozen, as Alana led the boys away. He could hear them moving around the guest rooms, drawers opening and closing. Soft voices murmuring comfort. The sounds of a family preparing to be broken again. Standing in his study doorway, he heard Marcus ask, "Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart." Alana answered, her voice thick but controlled. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt, but that's not your fault. Never your fault." She was packing methodically, efficiently, her movements betraying years of practice at starting over. The boys sat on their beds, watching with the quiet resignation of children who had learned too young that love could be conditional. Jonathan remained in the doorway, wrestling with the weight of history repeating itself. His mother's voice echoed in his head, speaking of reputation and responsibility. But it was drowned out by another sound, his son's prayers from just days ago, asking God to help their father love them. Alana zipped the last bag closed. Her face, when she looked at him, held no anger, only a deep, dignified sadness that cut him to the bone. "We'll be gone within the hour," she said quietly. The morning sun crept through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across empty rooms. Jonathan stood in the doorway of the guest bedroom where his sons had slept. The beds were neatly made, but evidence of their brief presence remained. A forgotten sock under the bed, a child's drawing left on the nightstand, the lingering scent of the shampoo they had used. He picked up the drawing. It showed 4 stick figures holding hands, labeled Mom, Dad, Marcus, and Thomas in wobbly children's handwriting. His throat tightened. The silence that had once felt like peace now pressed against him like a physical weight. He moved through his morning routine mechanically, shower, suit, coffee. But everything felt wrong. The quiet that had been his refuge for so many years now seemed to mock him with all that was missing. In the kitchen, he found himself staring at the box of cereal the boys had been eating yesterday morning. Their laughter had filled this space. Their questions had brought life to these sterile rooms. Now there was only the hollow echo of his footsteps. Unable to face his office, Jonathan found himself driving aimlessly through the city. Without conscious decision, he pulled into the parking lot of the small church where they had attended service together just days ago. The building was modest but well-maintained, with warm red brick and stained glass windows that caught the morning light. Inside, the sanctuary was empty except for an older man arranging hymnals in the pews. He looked up as Jonathan entered, offering a gentle smile. "Welcome," he said. "I'm Pastor Wright. Can I help you?" Jonathan hesitated. I'm not sure why I'm here." The pastor nodded as if this was a perfectly reasonable statement. "Sometimes that's the best reason to come." He gestured to a nearby pew. "Would you like to sit?" Jonathan sank onto the wooden bench, suddenly exhausted. The pastor sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. "I saw you here Sunday," Pastor Wright said quietly. "With Alana and the boys." Jonathan's head snapped up. "You know them?" "They've been part of our congregation for years. Fine young men, those boys, a credit to their mother's strength and faith." He paused. "And now they know their father too." "Knew," Jonathan corrected bitterly. "They're gone." "By whose choice?" The question hung in the air between them. Jonathan stared at his clasped hands. "My company is at risk. The board is threatening legal action. My position—" "Ah," Pastor Wright interrupted gently. "So you chose comfort over courage." "Excuse me. It's a common choice," the pastor continued, his voice free of judgment. "Comfort is safe, predictable. Courage asks more of us." "This isn't about courage," Jonathan protested. "It's about responsibility, protecting what I've built." "And what exactly have you built, Mr. Reed?" Pastor Wright turned to face him fully. "A fortune? A reputation? An empty house?" The words struck home with uncomfortable accuracy. Jonathan stood abruptly, pacing the aisle between the pews. "You don't understand. Everything I've worked for is at stake." "Everything?" Pastor Wright's voice remained calm. "Or just the things that can be measured in dollars and cents?" Jonathan stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there are different kinds of wealth, Mr. Reed. Different kinds of legacy." The pastor stood slowly. "Your mother left you a company. But what will you leave your sons? Another generation of absence? Another lesson that love is conditional on convenience?" "I'm trying to protect them," Jonathan insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are you? Or are you protecting yourself?" Pastor Wright moved to stand before him. "You know, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right despite the fear." Jonathan sank back onto the pew, the fight draining out of him. I don't know how to be a father." "No one does at first," the pastor said kindly. "But those boys aren't asking for perfection. They're just asking for presence, for the chance to know you. And if I fail them, then you'll have failed trying to love them. That's better than succeeding at abandoning them." Pastor Wright sat again. "You know, I've counseled many families over the years. Want to know what I've never heard? I've never heard anyone say they regretted choosing love, but I've heard plenty of regret from those who chose fear instead." They sat in silence for several minutes, sunlight streaming through the stained glass, painting patterns on the floor. Finally, Jonathan spoke. "My mother chose power over love. She kept me from my children for 15 years. "Yes," Pastor Wright agreed. "And how did that choice shape you? How did it shape them?" Jonathan thought of Thomas's face when he'd overheard the conversation in the study. The quiet resignation in Marcus's voice, asking if they'd done something wrong. The dignity with which Alana had packed their things, protecting their hearts even as her own was breaking. "I'm becoming exactly what I hated about her," he whispered. "No," Pastor Wright corrected. "You're standing at a crossroads she once faced, but you can make a different choice." Jonathan stood again, but this time with purpose rather than agitation. "I need to go." The pastor nodded. "God bless you, Mr. Reed. Whatever you decide." "Thank you," Jonathan said simply, and meant it. He drove through the city with new clarity, eventually parking across from the courthouse. The imposing stone building rose before him, its steps crowded with morning traffic, lawyers, clients, court officers going about their day. Jonathan stood on the sidewalk, briefcase in hand, watching the flow of humanity. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with messages from the board, from his lawyers, from worried shareholders. But for the first time in his adult life, the weight of corporate expectations felt less important than the weight of 2 small drawings carefully folded in his wallet. He thought of his mother, of all the choices she'd made in the name of protecting the company. He thought of Alana's quiet strength, of his son's hopeful faces, of 15 years of silence that could never be reclaimed. The morning sun warmed his face as he stood there, resolve finally crystallizing into certainty. The choice before him was suddenly, startlingly clear. The afternoon sun streamed through the courthouse's towering windows as Jonathan took his seat at the witness stand. The mahogany panels seemed to absorb the light, casting long shadows across the packed gallery. Camera shutters clicked softly from the press section, where reporters leaned forward with pens poised. Jonathan adjusted his tie, a gesture that had always brought him comfort in board meetings. Today it felt like it was choking him. His gaze swept across the room, finding Alana and the boys seated in the front row. Thomas gave a small wave, while Marcus pressed closer to his mother's side. Alana's expression remained serene, but Jonathan could see the tension in her shoulders. "Please state your name for the record," the court clerk requested. "Jonathan Andrew Reed." His voice carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. His attorney, Sarah Chen, approached the podium. "Mr. Reed, you've requested this hearing to make a public statement regarding recent allegations against both Alana Brooks and Reed Enterprises. Is that correct?" "Yes." Jonathan took a deep breath. "I'm here to tell the truth about my mother, Margaret Reed, and her actions 15 years ago." The corporate board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jonathan recognized their expressions, the same looks of dismissal and superiority he'd seen directed at Alana. "Please proceed, Mr. Reed." Jonathan unfolded a document from his breast pocket. "This is an email dated June 15th, 2008. It's from my mother to the head of Human Resources." He began to read. "We cannot allow this situation to continue. The optics of an interracial relationship involving the CEO's son would devastate shareholder confidence. Handle it immediately. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Jonathan continued, his voice growing stronger. There are dozens more like this. Memos, emails, meeting minutes, all documenting a coordinated effort to remove Alana Brooks from my life, using racial bias as justification. My mother didn't just know about my children, she actively worked to keep them from me. Objection. The board's attorney shot to his feet. This is speculation. Overruled. The judge interjected. Continue, Mr. Reed. Jonathan produced more documents, laying bare 15 years of systematic discrimination. He detailed how his mother had threatened Alana's career, her housing, her future, all while hiding behind corporate policy and plausible deniability. The board knew, he stated firmly. They helped implement these policies. They supported decisions that destroyed families, not just mine, but countless others, all in the name of protecting the company's image. The corporate attorney's face had grown increasingly red. This is slander. Mr. Reed is clearly emotionally compromised. These are the company's own records. Jonathan cut in. Every document is authenticated. Every memo is signed. Every policy was approved by this board. He turned to face the gallery directly. I am choosing to forfeit my majority control of Reed Enterprises. I cannot lead a company built on such a foundation of prejudice and fear. But more importantly, his voice softened as he looked at his sons, I cannot teach my children that profit matters more than principle. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters rushed for the doors, phones already pressed to their ears. Board members huddled with their attorneys, faces ashen. Through it all, Alana sat perfectly still, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! This court will have order. When the noise subsided, Jonathan spoke again. I move to have all allegations against Alana Brooks dismissed with prejudice. The only person who attempted manipulation in this situation was my mother, and by extension, this board. So noted. The judge replied. Given the evidence presented, this court finds no merit to the claims against Ms. Brooks. Case dismissed. Jonathan stepped down from the witness stand on shaky legs. The corporate board filed out quickly, their authority crumbling with each new revelation hitting the news. He could already hear the media frenzy building outside the courthouse doors. Thomas broke away from Alana and ran to Jonathan, wrapping his arms around his father's waist. Did you really give up your company for us? Jonathan knelt down to his son's level. I gave up something I owned to keep something I love. That's not a sacrifice, it's a privilege. Marcus approached more slowly, studying Jonathan's face. Are you scared? Yes, Jonathan answered honestly. But being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do the right thing anyway. Alana joined them, her eyes bright with emotion. Thank you, she whispered. Not for the testimony, for choosing them, for choosing love. Jonathan stood, straightening his jacket. The weight of corporate expectations had lifted from his shoulders, leaving him feeling strangely light. Uncertain of what came next, but certain it was right. Together, they walked toward the courthouse doors. Outside, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. But for the first time in his life, Jonathan wasn't concerned about image or appearances or stock prices. He was simply a father walking with his family, stepping into an unknown future with faith instead of fear. The heavy doors swung open, flooding them with sunlight. Jonathan squinted against the brightness, feeling the warm air on his face. He was no longer the man who lived without noise, no longer bound by his mother's prejudices or his own fears. He was simply free. The sun was setting over the city as Jonathan's car pulled up to the modest apartment complex where Alana and the boys were staying temporarily. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, heart pounding with an unfamiliar nervousness. The afternoon's courtroom battle felt almost easy compared to what he needed to do. Now. He sat there for several long moments, watching the warm orange light fade from the sky. The building wasn't in a bad neighborhood, but it was a far cry from his penthouse. Alana had refused to take money from his mother all those years ago, choosing dignity over comfort. That strength of character humbled him now. Finally, Jonathan stepped out of his car. The evening air was cool against his face, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from a nearby garden. He straightened his tie out of habit, then deliberately loosened it. This wasn't a business meeting. This was about family. As he climbed the stairs to the second floor, Jonathan remembered the first time he'd seen the boys in his lobby. How quick he'd been to deny them, to protect his carefully ordered world. Now that world had crumbled, and he found himself grateful for its destruction. He paused outside apartment 212, gathering his courage. Before he could knock, the door opened. Alana stood there, still wearing her courtroom clothes, but with her hair now loose around her shoulders. "I saw you from the window," she said quietly. "You sat in your car for 20 minutes. Jonathan nodded, not surprised she'd noticed. Alana had always been observant. "I was trying to find the right words. Come in," she offered, stepping aside. "The boys are doing their homework in the kitchen." The apartment was small but warm, filled with the evidence of family life. School books and toys were neatly arranged on shelves. Crayon drawings decorated the refrigerator. The scent of recent dinner, something with garlic and herbs, lingered in the air. Thomas and Marcus looked up from their textbooks as Jonathan entered. Their expressions were guarded, uncertain. The hurt from overhearing his words about ending their arrangement was still fresh. "Hi, Dad," Marcus said hesitantly, testing the word. Jonathan's throat tightened. "Hi, boys. Could we talk for a minute? All of us?" Alana gestured to the small living room. They gathered there, the boys perching on the worn couch while Jonathan remained standing. He'd prepared speeches all the way over, but looking at their faces, he knew only raw honesty would do. "I owe you all an apology," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Not a corporate apology, not an excuse, a real apology from my heart." He turned to Alana first. "I'm sorry for not believing you when you first came to me. I'm sorry for doubting your character and your motives. You raised our sons with integrity and love while I hid in my comfortable life. You deserved better." Alana's eyes glistened, but she remained silent, letting him continue. Jonathan knelt down to face his sons directly. "Thomas, Marcus, I'm so sorry for pushing you away, for making you feel unwanted, for caring more about my company than about being your father. You are the greatest gift I've ever received, and I almost threw that away because I was scared." "Scared of what?" Thomas asked softly. "Scared of loving someone, scared of being hurt, scared of changing." Jonathan smiled sadly. "My mother taught me that love was weakness, but watching you pray for me, seeing how you care for each other, you taught me that love is strength." Marcus fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. "Are you still going to make us leave?" "No," Jonathan said firmly. "Never again. I'm here to ask if you'll let me try again, not because of any legal papers or company rules, but because I want to be your father, really be your father with all my heart." He looked at Alana. "If you'll let me." Alana studied him carefully. She had always been able to see through his corporate mask to the truth beneath. Now there was no mask, just a man asking for a chance to love his children. "The boys need stability," she said finally. "They need to know they can count on you, even when things get difficult. This isn't something you can quit when it becomes inconvenient." "I know," Jonathan replied. "I gave up the company today because some things matter more than money or power. I choose them. I choose this family." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Alana nodded slowly. "We can try, for the boys' sake." "For all our sakes," Jonathan corrected gently. "I want to know you too, Alana, the woman who had the courage to raise our sons alone rather than compromise her values. The woman who taught them faith and kindness when I could only teach them rejection." Tears spilled onto Alana's cheeks. "It wasn't easy." "I know, but you're not alone anymore." Marcus slid off the couch first, moving cautiously toward Jonathan. Thomas followed a moment later. Jonathan opened his arms, and suddenly both boys were hugging him tightly. He wrapped them in his embrace, breathing in the scent of their hair, feeling their small bodies trembling against him. "I love you," he whispered, the words coming naturally now. "I love you both so much." The boys hugged him tighter in response. Over their heads, Jonathan met Alana's gaze. She was smiling through her tears, hope replacing the caution in her eyes. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning, messy and uncertain and beautiful in its imperfection. For the first time in his life, Jonathan felt truly rich. The transformation of Jonathan Reed's life unfolded gradually over the following weeks, like a flower slowly opening its petals to the sun. His once pristine penthouse now bore evidence of family life, backpacks by the door, homework spread across the dining table, and children's laughter echoing through formerly silent halls. In his office at Reed Enterprises, Jonathan sat behind his desk, reviewing the restructuring proposal with his legal team. "I want to maintain strategic oversight while stepping back from day-to-day operations," he explained, his tone firm but no longer cold. "My priority now is being present for my family." The board members exchanged glances, still adjusting to this new version of their CEO. Jonathan had appointed diverse executives to key positions, dismantling the old guard's power structure. His mother's discriminatory policies were being systematically reversed. At home, Alana was preparing to return to her career as an educational consultant. "Are you sure about watching the boys after school?" she asked Jonathan one evening, concern creasing her brow. "Your schedule is already adjusted," Jonathan finished, helping Thomas with his math homework. "I've moved all standing meetings to morning hours. The afternoons are for our sons." Alana's smile held both gratitude and lingering amazement at the changes in him. She had accepted a position at a prestigious consulting firm, her expertise finally receiving the recognition it deserved. Jonathan made sure the boys understood the significance of their mother's achievement. "Mom's going to help other schools be better," Marcus explained proudly to his friends during a playdate at their home. Jonathan watched from the kitchen, heart swelling at his son's words. The routine they developed felt natural, if sometimes challenging. Jonathan learned to pack lunches after several memorable mishaps, check homework, and navigate the complexities of elementary school social dynamics. He attended every parent-teacher conference, sports practice, and school event, even when it meant rescheduling million-dollar meetings. One afternoon, during Thomas's soccer game, Jonathan overheard another parent making a snide remark about their unusual family situation. Before he could respond, Alana touched his arm gently. "Let it go," she whispered. "They don't matter. Look at your son." Thomas was beaming at them from the field, waving excitedly. Jonathan waved back, realizing Alana was right. His mother's old social circle and their prejudices held no power over him anymore. The boys' faith continued to impact Jonathan in unexpected ways. Each evening, they said their prayers together, the children's simple trust gradually softening their father's skepticism. When Marcus asked why Jonathan didn't attend church with them, the question prompted honest self-reflection. "I'm still learning," Jonathan admitted, "but I'd like to understand what gives you and your mother such peace." The following Sunday, he accompanied them to service. The warmth of the congregation, free from pretense or judgment, touched something long dormant in his soul. He began meeting regularly with Pastor David, asking questions he'd never dared voice before. Faith isn't about being perfect, the pastor explained during one of their talks. It's about being willing to grow, to love, to forgive, including yourself. Those words resonated deeply as Jonathan worked to integrate his past and present. Photos of the boys now filled his office, replacing the austere art his mother had chosen. He kept a journal of their daily moments, Thomas mastering a difficult math concept, Marcus overcoming his fear of public speaking, both boys teaching him to play their favorite video games. One evening, after a particularly challenging day at the office, Jonathan returned home feeling drained. The transition hadn't been smooth for everyone. Some long-term clients had withdrawn, uncomfortable with the company's new direction. He found the boys in the kitchen with Alana, attempting to bake cookies. "Dad," Marcus called out naturally, holding up a misshapen chocolate chip cookie. "We saved you the first batch." Jonathan froze, emotion catching in his throat. It was the first time either boy had called him Dad without hesitation or conscious thought. The word fell from Marcus's lips easily, naturally, as if it had always belonged there. Thomas looked up from his mixing bowl, flour dusting his dark hair. "They're kind of burned on the bottom," he admitted with a grin. "But Mom says it's the love that counts. Your mum is very wise." Jonathan managed, accepting the slightly charred cookie. He bit into it, tasting not just chocolate and butter, but love, acceptance, and belonging. Alana watched him with understanding eyes, knowing exactly what that moment meant. This wasn't just about being called Dad. It was about earning it, about becoming the father these boys deserved. Later that night, after the kitchen was cleaned and the boys were asleep, Jonathan found a crayon drawing slipped under his office door. It showed 4 stick figures holding hands, 2 tall, 2 small, with "My Family" written in Marcus's careful handwriting. He pinned it carefully to his bulletin board, right next to the company's latest financial reports. The contrast between his old life and new couldn't have been clearer or more beautiful. This was what legacy truly meant, he realized. Not stock portfolios or corporate acquisitions, but the simple, profound gift of being called Dad by 2 boys who had chosen to trust him with their hearts. The late summer breeze carried the scent of barbecue and fresh-cut grass through the open windows of what had once been Jonathan Reed's silent fortress. Now, 6 months after that life-changing morning in his lobby, the penthouse hummed with the everyday symphony of family life. In the kitchen, Alana stood at the counter preparing a fruit salad, her movements graceful and unhurried. The space had transformed under her influence. Cheerful artwork decorated the once stark walls, and magnetic letters spelled out weekly schedules on the refrigerator. A stack of the boys' schoolwork sat proudly displayed on a corner shelf, evidence of their academic achievements. Jonathan paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. His tie was loosened, suit jacket discarded hours ago. These days, he made it home for dinner more often than not, having restructured his work schedule to prioritize family time. "Need any help?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves. Alana glanced up with a warm smile. "You could start setting the table outside. The boys are almost finished with their homework." Their interactions had evolved into something comfortable and genuine. The initial awkwardness had given way to mutual understanding, respect, and a deepening affection neither of them rushed to label. They were partners first, in parenting, in healing, in building something new from the ashes of the past. Marcus aced his history test, Alana mentioned, adding strawberries to the bowl, and Thomas was chosen for the advanced math program. Pride swelled in Jonathan's chest. "They're remarkable kids. You did an amazing job raising them." "We're doing an amazing job now." Alana corrected gently. They need their father too, and you've become exactly the father they deserve. From the study came the sound of chairs scraping and excited voices. Thomas and Marcus bounded into the kitchen, homework completed and ready for their evening routine. "Dad, can we play basketball before dinner?" Thomas asked, already bouncing on his toes. At 11 years old, he was growing tall and lanky, his energy seemingly endless. "Please," 9-year-old Marcus added, employing the puppy dog eyes that never failed to melt Jonathan's resolve. Jonathan checked his watch, an old habit he was learning to break. 20 minutes, he agreed, earning whoops of joy from both boys. The small basketball court he'd had installed in the building's private garden had quickly become their favorite spot. As they played, Jonathan marveled at how naturally physical affection now came to him. A hand on Thomas's shoulder for a good shot, a quick hug for Marcus after a tumble. From her vantage point on the patio, Alana watched them play. The sound of their laughter echoed off the surrounding buildings, filling the space that had once known only silence. She remembered those first difficult weeks, Jonathan's stiff uncertainty, the boys' careful testing of boundaries, her own fears about whether this fragile new reality could last. But day by day, moment by moment, they had built something beautiful. Jonathan had thrown himself into fatherhood with the same determination he'd once reserved for business deals. He attended every parent-teacher conference, coached Thomas's math club, and never missed Marcus's art shows. More importantly, he had learned to listen, really listen, to his son's thoughts, fears, and dreams. The emotional walls he'd built over decades crumbled in the face of their unconditional love. As the sky began to turn golden, they gathered around the patio table. The boys chattered about their day, sharing stories about friends and teachers. Jonathan and Alana exchanged glances over their heads, communicating volumes in a single look. "Remember when we first came here?" Marcus asked suddenly, reaching for the fruit salad. "Everything was so quiet and fancy. I was scared to touch anything." Thomas nodded. "And now it's home," he said simply. The word hung in the air, precious and true. Home. Not just a space filled with expensive furniture and careful arrangements, but a place where love grew, freely, where mistakes were forgiven, where faith and family intertwined. Jonathan looked around at his family, at Alana's gentle strength, at Thomas's quick mind and kind heart, at Marcus's artistic soul and infectious joy. The wealth he'd once prized seemed hollow compared to these treasures. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "about taking some time off next month. Maybe we could visit that beach you boys keep talking about." "Really?" Thomas's eyes lit up. "The one where Mum used to take us? If that's all right with your mother." Jonathan added, meeting Alana's gaze. She nodded, understanding the significance of his suggestion. That beach held memories of their early years without him. Now he wanted to be part of creating new memories there. "Can we build sandcastles?" Marcus asked excitedly. "And look for shells. Mom says the best shells come out at sunrise." "We'll do it all," Jonathan promised. "Every single thing." The conversation flowed easily as dinner continued, punctuated by laughter and playful debates about ice cream flavors for dessert. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their private garden, Jonathan felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. This was what his mother had feared, this messy, beautiful, love-filled life. She had tried to protect him from it, never understanding that in doing so, she had nearly condemned him to a lifetime of emptiness. The boys cleared the table without being asked, their voices carrying through the evening air as they playfully argued about whose turn it was to load the dishwasher. Alana began packing up the leftover food, her movements familiar and comfortable in what had once been his solitary domain. "Thank you," Jonathan said softly. She paused, knowing he meant more than just dinner. "For what?" "For not giving up, for showing me what really matters, for—" He gestured to their surroundings, to the evidence of family life scattered everywhere. All of this. Alana's smile held years of wisdom and grace. "Love reshapes us all, Jonathan. Sometimes we just need the courage to let it." From the kitchen came a burst of laughter, something about soap bubbles and wet socks. Jonathan and Alana shared an amused look before heading inside to investigate. The sky deepened to purple and pink, the first stars beginning to appear. Through the open windows, laughter continued to spill out into the warm evening air, filling the space that had once known only silence with the precious sound of joy. In this moment, in this place, they were complete, not perfect, but perfectly themselves. A family bound together not by obligation or legal documents, but by choice, by faith, and by love that had overcome every obstacle placed in its path. 1 year later, the neighborhood block party buzzed with activity. Children darted between tables laden with potluck dishes, and the sound of music and conversation filled the air. Jonathan Reed stood near the grill, chatting with a new family that had moved in down the street. "I'm Jonathan," he said, smiling warmly. "I live in the blue house on the corner with my sons and their mother." The words came naturally now. No hesitation, no qualifier about his position at the company. The neighbor nodded, gesturing toward Thomas and Marcus, who were playing basketball with other kids on the driveway. "That's my dad," Marcus called out proudly, catching sight of Jonathan. He waved enthusiastically before returning to the game, his face beaming. Those 3 simple words, "That's my dad," still had the power to make Jonathan's heart swell. He watched as Alana walked over to the boys, carrying water bottles and reminding them to stay hydrated in the summer heat. Her quiet strength and unwavering faith had guided them all through the past year's transformation. Standing there, surrounded by neighbors and watching his family, Jonathan finally understood what his mother had never grasped. The true inheritance wasn't the company shares or the penthouse or the carefully curated image she'd worked so hard to protect. It was this: the love of 2 boys who called him Dad without hesitation, the trust of a woman who had given him a second chance, and the faith that had led them all home. This was wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars or stock prices. This was the legacy that mattered. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.